Chapter 1. The Perfect Life Unraveling. Robert Morrison had always prided himself on being methodical. At 42, he built Morrison Construction from the ground up, turning a small residential contractor business into a multi-million-dollar commercial enterprise. His success hadn't come from luck or connections. It came from his ability to see 3 moves ahead, to anticipate problems before they materialized, and to never, ever let anyone who crossed him walk away unpunished. Standing in the marble foyer of his custom-built home in Westchester, Rob reflected on how perfectly ordered his life had seemed just 24 hours ago. The 6,000-square-foot colonial was everything Lindsay had wanted: vaulted ceilings, imported Italian fixtures, a kitchen that cost more than most people's cars. He'd given her everything, built this empire for their future together. The irony wasn't lost on him that his perfect life was crumbling on the same day he'd received the worst news of his 42 years. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer, Dr. Palmer had said, his weathered face grave behind wire-rimmed glasses. It's aggressive, Robert. We're looking at 6 to 8 months, maybe 12 with aggressive treatment. Rob had taken the news with characteristic stoicism. He'd faced down angry contractors, union bosses, and hostile takeover attempts. Cancer was just another enemy to fight. But as he drove home through the tree-lined streets of their affluent neighborhood, he'd felt something he hadn't experienced since his father died when he was 16, genuine fear. Not fear of dying. Fear of leaving Lindsay vulnerable and alone. How utterly naive he'd been. Now, standing in their entryway at 6:30 p.m., Rob loosened his silk tie and listened to the sounds coming from the living room. Lindsay's musical laugh, the one that had charmed him at a charity gala 8 years ago, mixed with another voice he recognized. Derek Walsh, Lindsay's personal trainer. The man was supposedly here for their Tuesday evening session, but something felt off. Rob had built his fortune on instincts, and right now every instinct screamed danger. He moved silently through the hallway, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the polished hardwood. The voices grew clearer as he approached the archway leading to the living room. "Can't believe how perfectly this worked out," Lindsay was saying, her voice bright with excitement. "I mean, who gets pancreatic cancer at 42? The odds were practically zero." Rob froze, his hand gripping the doorframe. "You're terrible," came Derek's voice, but he was chuckling. "The man just found out he's dying." "The man just made me very, very rich," Lindsay corrected. "Do you have any idea what the life insurance payout is? $2.5 million, plus the business assets, the house, the investment portfolio. I'll be worth close to $8 million when all is said and done." Rob's vision tunneled. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of building a life together, of believing she loved him, of working 70-hour weeks to give her everything she wanted. "How long do you think we'll have to wait?" Derek asked. Dr. Palmer said 6 to 8 months. Could be 12 with treatment, but Rob's too stubborn to put himself through chemo. He'll want to die with dignity. Lindsay's voice carried mock sadness. "Poor baby. At least he'll have a few months to put his affairs in order." The sound of glass clinking made Rob peer carefully around the corner. Lindsay and Derek were toasting with champagne flutes, Lindsay's manicured hand resting on Derek's muscled forearm. She was wearing the diamond bracelet Rob had given her for their anniversary last month. "To early retirement," Derek said, raising his glass. "To finally getting everything I deserve," Lindsay replied. They clinked glasses and drank, and Rob saw Derek's hand slide around Lindsay's waist, pulling her closer. She didn't resist. In fact, she melted into him like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Rob Morrison had built his empire by being ruthless when necessary, by never showing weakness, and by ensuring that anyone who betrayed his trust paid a price they'd never forget. As he watched his wife of 8 years celebrate his death sentence with her lover, he felt the last vestiges of the man who'd loved her die. What remained was something far more dangerous. Quietly, Rob backed away from the doorway and climbed the stairs to his home office. He had work to do. Chapter 2. The Foundation of Betrayal. Rob's home office was his sanctuary: dark walnut paneling, leather-bound books, and a mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather. It was here he'd planned his most successful business ventures, and now it would serve a different purpose entirely. He poured himself 3 fingers of 20-year-old scotch and opened his laptop. If Lindsay thought he'd simply roll over and die while she collected her windfall, she'd severely underestimated the man she'd married. The first order of business was understanding exactly what he was dealing with. Rob opened his contact list and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in years, Tony Castellano. Tony ran a private investigation firm that specialized in, as he put it, situations requiring discretion. Rob had used his services once before when a business partner was suspected of skimming contracts. Morrison Construction, Tony answered on the second ring. Figured you'd call eventually. Tony, I need comprehensive surveillance. My wife and Derek Walsh, he runs a fitness studio downtown. I want to know everything. How long they've been seeing each other, where they meet, what they're planning. Money's no object. How deep you want me to go? Ocean floor, Rob said. And Tony? Complete discretion. This doesn't exist. Never does with me. Give me 48 hours. Rob ended the call and opened his financial management software. Lindsay had no idea about the complexity of his holdings, shell companies, offshore accounts, trust structures designed to minimize taxes and protect assets. She'd only seen the surface, the business, the house, the obvious accounts. His phone buzzed. A text from Lindsay. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. He almost laughed. After 8 years of marriage, she was still a terrible liar. The next morning, Rob made an appointment with his attorney, Bruce Hoffman. Bruce had been handling Morrison Construction's legal affairs for 15 years and knew where every financial body was buried. I need to update my will, Rob said as they sat in Bruce's corner office overlooking the harbor. Complete restructuring. Bruce frowned. Rob, you just updated everything last year when you bought the new property upstate. What's changed? Let's call it a precautionary measure. I want to create a new trust structure, something that requires very specific conditions to be met before any beneficiary can access the funds. What kind of conditions? Rob smiled, and Bruce later told his wife it was the most unsettling expression he'd ever seen on a client's face. The kind that ensure only people who truly deserve my legacy will receive it. That afternoon, Rob's phone rang. Tony Castellano. You sitting down? Tony asked without preamble. Go ahead. Your wife and this Walsh character have been screwing around for 18 months. They're not even trying to hide it. Meeting at hotels, his apartment, even your beach house in the Hamptons. I've got photos, credit card receipts, the works. Rob felt a cold satisfaction. 18 months. She'd been planning this for longer than his illness had existed. There's more, Tony continued. Walsh is in debt up to his eyeballs. His gym is hemorrhaging money. Rent's 3 months behind. Equipment loans in default. Word is he owes some very unfriendly people about $200,000. Gambling. Cocaine. Expensive habit, expensive friends. Your wife's been helping him make payments. Rob's grip tightened on the phone. With my money. Gets better. I tapped their phones like you asked. They're planning to disappear together once you're dead. Walsh has been researching countries with no extradition treaties. Send me everything, Rob said. And Tony? I may need your services for a more extended engagement. Whatever you need, boss. That evening, Rob sat in his study reviewing Tony's initial report. Photos of Lindsay and Derek at restaurants, hotels, entering and leaving his apartment. Credit card statements showing thousands in charges to high-end hotels and restaurants during times when Lindsay claimed to be shopping with friends or visiting her sister. The betrayal ran deeper than simple adultery. They'd been systematically planning his demise, counting on his death to solve all their problems. Lindsay got her financial windfall, Derek got his debt relief, and Rob got a premature grave. But Robert Morrison hadn't built an empire by being anyone's victim. He opened his laptop and began typing an email to Dr. Palmer. If Lindsay wanted him to die with dignity, he'd give her a show she'd never forget. Chapter 3. The Call That Changed Everything. 3 weeks had passed since Rob discovered his wife's true nature. 3 weeks of watching Lindsay perform the role of concerned, loving wife while secretly planning her new life with Derek Walsh. She'd become almost solicitous, cooking his favorite meals, fussing over his medication schedule, even suggesting they take a second honeymoon while he was still feeling strong. The performance was flawless. If Rob hadn't heard her celebrating his death sentence, he might have been touched by her apparent devotion. Instead, every gesture made him angrier. This morning, Lindsay had left for what she claimed was a spa day with her sister Grace. Rob's surveillance confirmed she was actually spending the day at Derek's apartment, probably planning their post-funeral arrangements. Perfect. Rob stood in his home office, phone in hand, about to make the call that would set everything in motion. But first, he needed to complete one final preparation. He opened his safe and withdrew a manila envelope containing documents he'd spent the last 3 weeks perfecting with Bruce Hoffman's help. Insurance policies, will amendments, trust restructures, all designed to ensure Lindsay's victory would be as hollow as her love had been. Then he dialed Dr. Palmer's direct line. "Robert, how are you feeling? Any changes in the pain levels?" "Actually, doctor, that's why I'm calling. I've been doing some research, and I want to explore every possible treatment option. Clinical trials, experimental procedures, whatever it takes." Dr. Palmer paused. "Rob, we discussed this. With stage 3 pancreatic cancer, the survival rates for aggressive treatment are still quite low, and the quality of life impact is severe. I understand that, but I'm not ready to give up. My wife needs more time to adjust to this. She's been so strong, but I can see how this is destroying her. If only that were true. There's a new immunotherapy trial at Sloan Kettering," Dr. Palmer said slowly. "Very experimental, but they've had some promising results with patients in your situation. The odds are still long, but I want to try it. Whatever it takes. I'll make some calls. The waiting list is extensive, but given your situation, they might be able to fast-track your application." "Thank you, doctor. And please, I want to surprise Lindsay with this news. She's been so worried, and I want to give her hope." After ending the call, Rob immediately dialed Tony Castellano. "I need you to leak something to Derek Walsh," Rob said. "Through channels that won't trace back to you. Let him know that I'm pursuing aggressive treatment, that my prognosis might be improving. That'll shake up their timeline. They expecting you to die on schedule." "Precisely. And Tony, I want you to start phase 2 of our operation. It's time to apply some pressure." Phase 2 had taken considerable planning. Rob had spent 3 weeks studying Derek Walsh's financial situation, his debts, his associations. The man owed money to some very impatient people, and Rob was about to make his situation much worse. That afternoon, Derek received a visit from 2 men claiming to represent his primary creditor. They explained that his payment schedule was being accelerated. The full $200,000 was now due within 30 days, not the 6 months he'd negotiated. Derek panicked, calling Lindsay immediately. Rob, monitoring the call through Tony's equipment, listened to Derek's frantic explanation. "They can't do this," Lindsay said, her voice sharp with worry. "We had a deal. Rob's supposed to be dead in a few months. Well, apparently he's not dying fast enough. They want their money now, Lindsay. If I don't pay, they're going to break my legs. Or worse. How much do you need?" "All of it. 200,000. Do we have that kind of cash?" Rob listened to Lindsay's heavy breathing as she calculated. "I can liquidate some investments, max out the credit cards. It'll be tight, but I can probably get close." "How close?" "Maybe 150. We'll have to figure out the rest." "This is insane. Maybe we should just wait, see what happens with Rob's treatment." "No," Lindsay's voice turned steel cold. "I'm not spending another year playing the devoted wife while you spiral deeper into debt. We stick to the plan." Rob smiled as he ended the recording. Lindsay was about to liquidate her personal assets to pay Derek's debts, money she'd never recover. But more importantly, they were about to make a much bigger mistake. That evening, Lindsay came home flushed and agitated. She made a show of asking about his day, but Rob could see her mind working behind her eyes. "Actually," Rob said over dinner, "I have some news. I saw Dr. Palmer today." Lindsay's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Oh, what did he say?" "There's a new treatment option. An experimental trial at Sloan Kettering. It's aggressive, but there's a real chance it could extend my prognosis significantly." The color drained from Lindsay's face. How significantly?" "Could be years instead of months." Dr. Palmer is optimistic. Rob watched his wife process this information, saw the moment her carefully constructed future began to crumble. She forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. That's wonderful news, honey. I'm so relieved." But her hands were shaking as she reached for her wine glass. That night, Lindsay claimed to be too emotional to sleep and retreated to the guest room. Rob lay in their king-sized bed, listening to her muffled phone conversation through the walls. She was calling Derek, no doubt sharing the devastating news that their meal ticket might survive. Rob closed his eyes and began planning phase 3. Soon, Lindsay and Derek would be desperate enough to make the one mistake that would destroy them both. Chapter 4, The Perfect Storm. By the fourth week after Rob's celebration party discovery, the pressure was beginning to show on Lindsay and Derek. Rob watched with cold satisfaction as his wife struggled to maintain her facade while liquidating assets to pay Derek's suddenly accelerated debts. She'd sold her jewelry collection, the pieces Rob hadn't given her, cashed out her personal retirement account, and maxed out 3 credit cards. Derek was still $50,000 short, and his creditors were growing impatient. Rob had orchestrated it all through Tony's network of contacts. The beauty was that every penny Lindsay spent was money she'd never see again, even if Rob died tomorrow. But Rob had no intention of dying anytime soon. Mr. Morrison? Dr. Palmer's voice was cautiously optimistic over the phone. I have some remarkable news about the Sloan Kettering trial. I'm listening. Your test results show some unusual markers that make you an ideal candidate for their new protocol. They want to start immediately. Now, I have to warn you. This is experimental, and the side effects can be severe. But the preliminary results suggest we might be looking at significant life extension, possibly even remission. Rob allowed himself a small smile. The unusual markers were entirely fictional, the result of a substantial donation to the hospital's research fund and a carefully orchestrated conversation with the right department head. Money, Rob had learned, could buy almost any medical opinion. What kind of timeline are we looking at, doctor? If the treatment works as expected, we could be talking about 5 to 10 years, potentially more. You'd need to commit to an intensive 6-month protocol. But Rob, this could change everything. Set it up. Whatever it takes. That evening, Rob delivered the news to Lindsay over dinner at Romano's, their favorite Italian restaurant. He'd chosen the location carefully. Public enough that Lindsay couldn't react too dramatically, intimate enough that their conversation wouldn't be overheard. The doctors want to start a new treatment protocol, he said, cutting into his osso buco. Experimental therapy at Sloan Kettering. Lindsay's champagne glass trembled in her hand. What does that mean? It means I might live, sweetheart. Not just survive, really live. We could have years together. Rob studied his wife's face as she processed this information. The micro-expressions were fascinating. Shock, disappointment, panic, and finally a desperate attempt to appear relieved. That's incredible news, she managed. I'm so happy. But her eyes told a different story. That night, Lindsay claimed she needed to process the emotional roller coaster and drove to Grace's house. Rob's surveillance team confirmed she actually went to Derek's apartment, where she stayed until 3 a.m. The next morning brought a call from Tony Castellano. Your boy Derek is getting desperate, Tony reported. Word on the street is he's considering some very stupid options to raise the cash he owes, such as insurance fraud. Apparently, he's been asking around about staged accidents, ways to get injured and collect on his disability policy. Rob felt a cold thrill of anticipation. How injured? Enough to claim permanent disability. We're talking about someone willing to break his own legs to get out of debt. Perfect. Rob had been waiting for Derek to consider something truly desperate, something that would give Rob the leverage he needed for the final phase of his plan. Tony, I want you to arrange a meeting. Use intermediaries, someone Derek thinks can help him stage his accident. But instead of helping him, I want him led into a situation where he thinks he's committing insurance fraud, but he's actually stepping into a trap. What kind of trap? The kind that destroys his life so completely that running away with my wife becomes impossible. 2 days later, Derek received a call from someone claiming to be connected to a network that specialized in insurance fraud. They arranged to meet at a warehouse in Queens, supposedly to discuss the details of Derek's staged accident. Derek, desperate and out of options, agreed. Meanwhile, Rob was implementing the final changes to his estate planning. The new trust structure would ensure that if anything happened to him, Lindsay would receive exactly nothing. Every asset would be held in trust for charitable organizations, with one exception. Lindsay would receive $1 and a letter explaining exactly why. But Rob wasn't planning to die. He was planning something much more satisfying. On the night of Derek's meeting, Rob received confirmation that everything was in place. Derek had walked into the warehouse thinking he was about to solve all his problems. Instead, he'd walked into a room full of undercover federal agents investigating an actual insurance fraud ring. Derek Walsh was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The evidence against him was overwhelming, recorded conversations, financial records, and witness testimony that would ensure he spent the next 10 to 15 years in federal prison. But the most beautiful part of Rob's plan was that Derek had no idea how he'd walked into the trap. As far as Derek knew, he'd simply been spectacularly unlucky. Rob's phone rang at 11 p.m. Lindsay, hysterical. Rob, something terrible has happened. Derek's been arrested. The police think he was involved in some kind of insurance fraud scheme. Insurance fraud? That's horrible, honey. When did this happen? Tonight. Grace called me. She heard it on the news. They arrested him at some warehouse in Queens. Rob, I don't understand. Derek's not a criminal. People can surprise you, Rob said quietly. Sometimes you think you know someone, and it turns out you never knew them at all. Lindsay was quiet for a long moment. What does this mean for his gym? His business? Rob almost laughed. Even now, she was thinking about Derek's assets, wondering if there was still money to be salvaged from her lover's downfall. I imagine it means Derek Walsh's life as he knew it is over, Rob said. Some mistakes you never recover from. Chapter 5, The Walls Close In. The arrest of Derek Walsh sent shockwaves through their affluent community. The local news picked up the story. Local fitness instructor arrested in multi-million-dollar insurance fraud ring. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know how well the Morrison family had known the accused. Rob watched with cold amusement as Lindsay struggled to maintain her composure while her world collapsed around her. Derek was being held without bail pending trial. His gym had been seized as evidence, and federal investigators were examining every aspect of his financial life, including his relationship with Lindsay Morrison. Mrs. Morrison, Agent Sarah Kim had called that morning. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Derek Walsh. Rob had been in the kitchen when Lindsay took the call, and he'd listened to her voice climb an octave as she tried to deflect. Relationship? He was my personal trainer. That's all. Our records show numerous payments from your personal accounts to Mr. Walsh over the past 18 months. Amounts well in excess of typical training fees. Lindsay's pause was a beat too long. Derek was having some financial difficulties. I helped him out a few times. It was just being neighborly. We'll need to schedule a formal interview to discuss these transactions in detail. After Lindsay hung up, Rob found her sitting at the kitchen island, staring at her hands. Everything okay, sweetheart? She looked up, her makeup smudged. The FBI wants to interview me about Derek. They think I might have been involved in whatever he was doing. Rob moved behind her chair and placed his hands on her shoulders, feeling her tense under his touch. I'm sure it's just routine. You have nothing to hide. But Lindsay did have something to hide, and they both knew it. The financial transfers to Derek, the hotel receipts, the 18 months of lies. All of it was about to be exposed under federal scrutiny. Maybe I should get a lawyer, Lindsay said quietly. That might be wise, Rob agreed. I can recommend someone if you'd like. What Rob didn't mention was that the lawyer he'd recommend specialized in criminal defense and would cost more per hour than most people made in a week. Legal fees that would quickly drain what remained of Lindsay's liquidated assets. That afternoon, Rob received a call from Bruce Hoffman. Rob, we need to talk. The FBI contacted my office about your wife's financial transactions. They're treating this as a potential money laundering investigation. Money laundering? For fitness training payments. The amounts were substantial, and the timing corresponds with Derek Walsh's debt payments to some very questionable people. If Lindsay knew where the money was going, she could be charged as an accessory. Rob felt a familiar cold satisfaction. What's the exposure? Depends on what they can prove she knew. If they can establish that she was aware Derek was using her money to pay off debts to organized crime figures, she's looking at serious federal charges. 5 to 10 years minimum. Perfect. Rob had counted on the FBI investigation expanding to include Lindsay, but the money laundering angle was even better than he'd hoped. That evening, Lindsay barely touched her dinner. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands shook when she reached for her wine glass. I keep thinking about Derek, she said suddenly. How could I have been so wrong about him? Rob set down his fork and studied his wife's face. Even now, facing potential federal charges, she was more concerned about Derek than about the damage her actions had done to their marriage. People show us what they want us to see, he said. Derek obviously had hidden depths. The FBI agent asked if I knew about Derek's gambling problem. What gambling problem? He never mentioned gambling to me. Another lie. Rob's investigation had revealed that Lindsay not only knew about Derek's gambling and drug debts, she'd helped him cover losses on several occasions. But now, facing federal prosecution, she was rewriting history to minimize her involvement. Maybe there's a lot about Derek you didn't know, Rob suggested. Lindsay looked up sharply, and for a moment Rob thought she might confess everything. Instead, she pushed back from the table. I'm not feeling well. I think I'll go to bed early. As Lindsay retreated upstairs, Rob's phone buzzed with a text from Tony Castellano. Package delivered. The package was information Rob had been saving for the right moment. Evidence that Lindsay's affair with Derek had begun not 18 months ago, as Tony had originally reported, but 2 years ago, just 6 months after she'd convinced Rob to increase his life insurance coverage. The timing was damning. It suggested premeditation, a long-term plan to profit from Rob's death that predated his cancer diagnosis by 18 months. Tomorrow, that evidence would find its way to Agent Kim's desk, along with financial records showing Lindsay had been researching life insurance payouts and consulting with divorce attorneys before Rob was ever diagnosed. Rob poured himself a scotch and walked out to the deck overlooking their manicured backyard. In the distance, he could see the lights of Derek's gym, now shuttered and wrapped in federal crime scene tape. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Derek was facing 15 years in federal prison. Lindsay was about to be indicted on money laundering charges. And Rob's miraculous recovery was about to become even more miraculous. Tomorrow, he would begin phase 4 of his plan, the phase that would ensure Lindsay understood the true cost of betrayal. His phone rang. Dr. Palmer. Rob, I have incredible news. Your latest test results show the treatment is working even better than we hoped. Not only are we seeing tumor reduction, but your overall health markers are improving dramatically. How dramatically? I've never seen anything like it. If this continues, we might be looking at complete remission within 6 months. Rob, you might not just survive this. You might be completely cured. Rob smiled into the darkness. That's wonderful news, doctor. I can't wait to share it with Lindsay. But first, he had one more call to make. Chapter 6. The Net Titans. Agent Sarah Kim was nothing if not thorough. Within 48 hours of receiving Rob's anonymous package of evidence, she'd assembled a task force to investigate what was rapidly becoming the Lindsay Morrison money laundering case. Rob learned this from his newest asset, a contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office who owed him a significant favor from a construction contract 3 years earlier. The federal building in Lower Manhattan had needed emergency structural repairs, and Rob had completed the work at cost in exchange for future considerations. He was calling in that favor now. They're building a RICO case, his contact informed him over a secure phone line. Your wife's financial transfers to Walsh correspond with payments he made to some very bad people. The feds think she was knowingly helping him launder drug money. What's the timeline? Indictments within the week. They want to move fast before she can destroy evidence or flee the country. Rob almost laughed. Lindsay wouldn't flee. She still believed she was going to inherit millions when he died. She had no idea that his miraculous recovery was about to become permanent, or that his will had been restructured to leave her nothing. That evening, Rob made dinner reservations at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where he'd proposed to Lindsay 8 years earlier. He wanted their final meal together to be memorable. Lindsay emerged from their bedroom wearing the black Armani dress Rob had bought her for their anniversary. She'd clearly been crying again, but she'd attempted to cover it with makeup. You look beautiful, Rob said, and meant it. Even knowing what she was, Lindsay Morrison was still a stunning woman. It made her betrayal even more painful, and his revenge even sweeter. During the ride to Manhattan, Lindsay was unusually quiet. She stared out the window at the city lights, occasionally checking her phone for messages that never came. Have you heard anything more about Derek? Rob asked casually. His lawyer says the case is complicated. They're claiming he was part of some larger criminal organization. Lindsay's voice was barely above a whisper. I just don't understand how this happened. Sometimes people we trust turn out to be completely different than we thought, Rob said. Sometimes they've been lying to us for years. Lindsay turned to look at him, something flickering in her eyes. For a moment, Rob wondered if she suspected anything. Then she turned back to the window. At dinner, Rob ordered a bottle of Cristal, the same champagne Lindsay and Derek had used to toast his death sentence. The irony was delicious. I have news, Rob said as the waiter poured their champagne. About my treatment. Lindsay's hand froze on her glass. What kind of news? The best possible kind. Dr. Palmer called today. The experimental therapy is working better than anyone hoped. Not only is the cancer responding, but I might achieve complete remission. Rob watched the blood drain from Lindsay's face. Complete remission? You mean? I mean I'm going to live, Lindsay. Probably for many, many years. Lindsay forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. That's incredible. I'm so happy. But her hands were shaking so badly, she couldn't lift her champagne glass. There's more, Rob continued. The doctors want to publish a paper about my case. Apparently, my recovery is unprecedented. They're calling it miraculous. Miraculous, Lindsay repeated faintly. Yes, it seems I'm much harder to kill than anyone expected. Something in Rob's tone made Lindsay look up sharply. For a moment, their eyes met across the table, and Rob saw a recognition flicker in her gaze. She knew, maybe not the full extent of his knowledge, but she knew something was wrong. Rob, she began carefully, is everything okay? You seem different lately. Different how? I don't know. Distant. Like you're angry about something. Rob smiled and raised his champagne glass. I'm not angry, sweetheart. I'm grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful to see people's true colors. Grateful to have the chance to set things right. They clinked glasses, and Rob drank deeply while Lindsay barely touched her lips to the champagne. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence. Lindsay picked at her food while Rob enjoyed every bite, knowing it would be their last meal together as husband and wife. On the drive home, Lindsay's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and went pale. Everything all right? Rob asked. Wrong number, she said quickly, but Rob had caught a glimpse of the screen. The message was from her lawyer. Need to talk. Call immediately. The indictments were coming. That night, Lindsay claimed she wasn't feeling well and retreated to the guest room again. Rob lay in their master bedroom, listening to her muffled phone conversations through the walls. At 2 a.m., he heard her bedroom door open and her footsteps on the stairs. From his window, he watched her get into her BMW and drive away into the night. Rob smiled and reached for his phone. Time for the final phase. Tony, it's time. Execute the last protocol. All of it. Everything. I want her to understand exactly what she's lost before she loses her freedom. Consider it done, boss. Rob hung up and walked to his safe. Inside was a manila envelope containing copies of every piece of evidence he'd gathered. Photos, financial records, recorded conversations, surveillance reports. Everything that proved Lindsay and Derek's affair, their plans for his death, and their systematic theft of his assets. Tomorrow morning, Lindsay would wake up to federal agents at her door with arrest warrants. But tonight, she would receive one final gift from her loving husband, the truth about how thoroughly she'd been outplayed. Rob sealed the envelope and placed it on Lindsay's pillow in the guest room. Then he returned to his bedroom and slept better than he had in months. After all, revenge was always sweetest when served with absolute precision. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Lindsay Morrison was arrested at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning as she attempted to withdraw the maximum daily limit from 3 different ATM locations. Federal agents had been tracking her movements since midnight, waiting for her to make exactly this mistake. Rob watched the arrest from his kitchen window, coffee in hand, as FBI agents led his wife in handcuffs to a black sedan. She was still wearing the clothes from their dinner at Le Bernardin, her hair disheveled and makeup smeared from a sleepless night. Agent Sarah Kim approached the house as Lindsay's car disappeared down the street. Mr. Morrison? I'm Agent Kim. We spoke yesterday about your wife's connection to Derek Walsh. Of course. How can I help? We've arrested Mrs. Morrison on charges of money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. We'll need to search the premises as part of our investigation. Rob stepped aside with apparent cooperation. Whatever you need, Agent Kim. I had no idea Lindsay was involved in anything illegal. The search was thorough but yielded nothing Rob hadn't expected them to find. Lindsay's laptop contained evidence of her affair, financial transfers to Derek, and most damning of all, a folder of documents she'd been preparing for what she'd labeled post-Rob planning. The folder included real estate listings for luxury condos in the Caribbean, flight schedules to non-extradition countries, and a detailed breakdown of how she planned to liquidate Rob's assets after his death. Agent Kim emerged from the search looking grim. Mr. Morrison, I'm afraid your wife was planning more than adultery. These documents suggest she was prepared to flee the country with substantial assets after your death. Rob allowed appropriate shock to register on his face. I don't understand. Why would she think? I mean, yes, I've been ill, but the doctors are optimistic about my recovery. When was the last time you updated your will, sir? About a month ago, actually. When I started the new treatment protocol, I wanted to make sure everything was in order, just in case. Would you mind if we examined those documents? Given the circumstances, we need to understand the full scope of your wife's financial planning. Rob provided copies of his will, the new version that left Lindsay exactly $1 and a letter. Agent Kim read the documents with growing interest. Mr. Morrison, according to this will, your wife would inherit almost nothing in the event of your death. Are you saying she wasn't aware of these changes? That's correct. I wanted to surprise her with the news that I was planning to leave the bulk of my estate to charity. Lindsay's always been passionate about giving back to the community. Another lie, but a useful one. Lindsay's charitable contributions over their 8-year marriage totaled exactly $0. Agent Kim studied the documents for several more minutes. Sir, these financial arrangements suggest your wife was planning to profit from your death based on outdated information about your estate. That's horrible to consider, Rob said. Surely you don't think Lindsay would actually wish me harm? Mr. Morrison, we've uncovered evidence suggesting your wife and Derek Walsh had been planning your death for over 2 years. We found recorded conversations discussing how to accelerate your demise. This was the piece Rob had been waiting for, evidence he'd manufactured through carefully edited recordings and planted communications. With Derek facing federal charges and unable to contradict the narrative, Lindsay had no way to prove the conversations were fabricated. I think I need to sit down, Rob said weakly. Agent Kim helped him to a chair. Sir, I know this is difficult, but we believe your wife may have been attempting to murder you for your life insurance money. Murder? Rob's voice cracked with apparent shock. But I'm recovering. The treatment is working. Yes, sir. And that recovery may have saved your life in more ways than one. After the agents left, Rob poured himself a scotch and reviewed what he'd accomplished. Lindsay was facing federal charges that would put her away for 15 to 20 years. Derek was already in federal custody with similar charges, plus the insurance fraud conspiracy. Both of their reputations were destroyed, their assets seized, their future together impossible. But Rob wasn't finished. That afternoon, he called his attorney Bruce Hoffman. Bruce, I want to file for divorce immediately. Adultery, fraud, attempted murder, whatever charges will stick. Rob, given Lindsay's federal charges, a divorce might be redundant. She's not going to be in a position to claim any assets regardless. This isn't about the assets, Rob said coldly. This is about making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person I was married to. What about the attempted murder angle? That's a serious accusation. Agent Kim seemed to think there was evidence. I'm just following the FBI's lead. Bruce was quiet for a moment. Rob, you've been planning this for a while, haven't you? I've been protecting my interests, Bruce. Exactly like you taught me. This level of coordination, the timing of your will changes, the way everything fell into place. How long have you known about Lindsay's affair? Rob smiled. Long enough to make sure justice was served. That evening, Rob received a call from the federal detention center. Lindsay was requesting permission to speak with him. Put her through, Rob said. Lindsay's voice was small and broken when she came on the line. Rob, I don't understand what's happening. They're saying I tried to kill you. They're saying I stole money from you. None of this is true. Isn't it, Lindsay? What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time for honesty between us. Real honesty. Lindsay was quiet for a long moment. How long have you known? About your affair with Derek? About your celebration party when I was diagnosed? About your plans to run away together after I died? Rob's voice was calm, almost conversational. Long enough. The phone calls, the financial records, the FBI investigation. You orchestrated all of this. I simply allowed the truth to surface, Lindsay. You made the choices. You committed the crimes. You celebrated my death. I just made sure there were consequences. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. No, Rob said quietly. You were my wife. The woman who celebrated my cancer diagnosis stopped being my wife that night. Rob, please. I made mistakes, but I never tried to kill you. The FBI has it wrong. Do they? You liquidated assets to pay Derek's debts. You planned to flee the country after my death. You systematically stole from me for 2 years. Whether you put poison in my coffee or just waited for cancer to do the work, the intent was the same. Lindsay began crying. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. You're sorry you got caught, Lindsay. There's a difference. Can you forgive me? Can we work through this? Rob laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Lindsay, I'm going to live for many, many years. Long enough to watch you serve every day of your sentence. Long enough to make sure you never profit from betraying me. Long enough to ensure that when you finally get out of prison, you'll have nothing and no one. Rob, goodbye, Lindsay. Enjoy federal prison. I hear it builds character. Rob hung up and deleted Lindsay's contact information from his phone. Tomorrow, the divorce papers would be filed. Next week, the local newspapers would run the full story of Lindsay Morrison's arrest and federal charges. But tonight, Rob Morrison poured himself a 20-year-old scotch and began planning the rest of his life. A life free from betrayal, free from false love, and free from anyone who thought Robert Morrison was an easy target. He'd built an empire once before. Now he would enjoy it alone, exactly as he deserved. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. 6 months after Lindsay's arrest, Robert Morrison sat in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Morrison Construction, reviewing quarterly reports that showed record profits. His miraculous recovery had become the talk of the medical community. Dr. Palmer had indeed published a paper about his case, though the details of Rob's experimental treatment remained carefully vague. The truth was that Rob had never been as sick as Dr. Palmer initially believed. A combination of stress-induced symptoms, carefully timed medical consultations, and Rob's own considerable acting ability had created the impression of a terminal diagnosis. The real experimental treatment had been psychological, designed to give Lindsay and Derek enough hope to destroy themselves completely. Mr. Morrison? His secretary's voice came through the intercom. Your attorney is here for the 2 p.m. meeting. Bruce Hoffman entered carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of a man who'd seen too much. How did the settlement negotiations go? Rob asked without looking up from his reports. Lindsay's legal team wanted to discuss a plea bargain. They're offering full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. And the federal prosecutor declined. With Derek Walsh's testimony and the evidence you provided, they don't need her cooperation. She's looking at 15 to 20 years. Rob nodded with satisfaction. Derek had attempted to negotiate his own plea deal by offering to testify against Lindsay, but federal prosecutors had enough evidence to convict both of them separately. Derek's betrayal of Lindsay was simply the final nail in their collective coffin. What about the civil matters? The divorce was finalized yesterday. Lindsay gets exactly what your will specified, $1 and a letter explaining why. All her remaining assets were seized to pay restitution for the money laundering charges. And Derek's gym? Sold at auction last week. The proceeds went to his creditors and legal fees. He'll leave prison with nothing but the clothes on his back. Rob leaned back in his leather chair, finally allowing himself a moment of pure satisfaction. How's Lindsay adjusting to federal prison? Bruce consulted his notes. According to her attorney, not well. She's in protective custody after some issues with other inmates. Apparently, women who try to murder their husbands aren't popular in the general population. Tragic, Rob said without a trace of sympathy. Rob, can I ask you something? Off the record. Go ahead. How much of this did you plan from the beginning? The timing of your will changes, the financial tracking, the federal investigation. It's too coordinated to be coincidental. Rob was quiet for a long moment, then smiled. Bruce, let's just say I've always believed in being prepared for betrayal. And your health? Dr. Palmer's reports about your recovery seem almost too miraculous. Sometimes, Rob said carefully, the power of positive thinking can overcome even the worst diagnosis. Bruce stared at his client for several heartbeats, then shook his head. I don't want to know, do I? Probably not. After Bruce left, Rob walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Construction cranes dotted the skyline. 3 of them belonged to Morrison Construction Projects. His company was thriving, his health was perfect, and his enemies were exactly where they belonged. His phone buzzed with a text from Tony Castellano. Lindsay's sister Grace wants to meet. Says she has information you might want. Rob smiled. Grace had been Lindsay's closest confidant and co-conspirator in maintaining the facade of a loving marriage. She'd known about the affair, the financial transfers, probably even the celebration party. Now that Lindsay was in prison, Grace was likely looking to save herself from potential charges as an accessory. Rob typed back, "Set it up. I'm curious what she has to say." 2 hours later, Rob sat across from Grace Chun in a coffee shop in Midtown. Lindsay's younger sister was a pale reflection of her sibling, less beautiful, less charismatic, but apparently more intelligent about self-preservation. "Thank you for meeting with me," Grace began nervously. "I know this is awkward, given everything that's happened." "What did you want to discuss, Grace?" "Lindsay asked me to reach out to you. She wanted me to tell you that she's sorry, that she never meant for things to go so far." Rob studied Grace's face. "Is that all?" "She also wanted me to ask if there was any chance, any possibility that you might consider helping with her legal fees. The public defender she's been assigned isn't very experienced with federal cases." Rob almost laughed. Even from federal prison, Lindsay was still trying to manipulate him, still looking for ways to benefit from their relationship. "Grace, did you know about Lindsay's affair with Derek Walsh?" Grace's face flushed. "Ah, yes. I tried to talk her out of it, but did you know they were celebrating my cancer diagnosis?" "What? No, that's not. Lindsay would never." "I have recordings, Grace. I know exactly what your sister said and did." Grace's face went white. "Recordings?" "Among other evidence. The question is, how much did you know? Were you part of their planning?" "I wasn't part of anything. I told Lindsay she was making a mistake, that she should work on her marriage instead of planning my death for insurance money." Grace stared at him in shock. "Planning your death? Rob, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Lindsay never wanted you to die. She was just unhappy." Rob pulled out his phone and played a brief audio clip. Lindsay's voice, clear and unmistakable. "I'll be a rich widow within 6 months." Grace listened to her sister's recorded words with growing horror. "Oh God. Oh my God, Lindsay, what did you do?" "She made her choices," Rob said quietly. "Now she's living with the consequences. But the FBI said she tried to poison you, that she was actively trying to kill you. Is that true?" Rob studied Grace's face. The woman genuinely seemed shocked by the extent of Lindsay's betrayal. Perhaps she'd only known about the affair, not the deeper conspiracy. "Grace, what your sister intended to do to me, what she celebrated, what she planned, that's between Lindsay and the federal prosecutor now. But I want you to understand something clearly." "What?" "Lindsay Morrison is going to serve every day of her sentence. I will never help her, never forgive her, and never allow her to profit from betraying me. When she gets out of prison in 15 years, she'll be 50 years old with no money, no prospects, and no one who cares about her." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "She's still my sister." "Then maybe you should have given her better advice when you had the chance." Rob stood to leave, then paused. "Grace, if you were involved in any of Lindsay's planning, if you helped her in any way, I'd suggest you consult an attorney. The federal investigation is still ongoing." He left Grace sitting alone at the coffee shop, staring at her untouched latte with the expression of someone who'd just realized how close she'd come to destroying her own life. That evening, Rob had dinner alone in his empty house, surrounded by the silence that had replaced Lindsay's lies. For the first time in 8 years, he knew exactly where he stood, alone, successful, and completely in control of his own destiny. Tomorrow, he would begin the final chapter of his revenge. But tonight, Robert Morrison raised a glass of champagne to himself and to the perfect justice of watching betrayers destroy themselves. Chapter 9. The Final Victory. 1 year after Lindsay Morrison's arrest, Robert Morrison stood before the full-length mirror in his master bedroom, adjusting his Italian silk tie. Today marked several important milestones. Lindsay's sentencing hearing, the completion of his most ambitious construction project, and the public announcement that would cement his reputation as a man who never forgot a betrayal. The local news had requested an interview about his miraculous recovery and his decision to establish the Morrison Foundation for Cancer Research. What they didn't know was that Rob planned to use the platform to tell the complete story of his wife's betrayal, a final, public humiliation that would ensure Lindsay's crimes were never forgotten. Mr. Morrison? His new executive assistant, Maria Santos, knocked on his office door. "The car is ready to take you to the courthouse." Rob had hired Maria to replace the various functions Lindsay had performed in his life: managing his social calendar, coordinating with contractors, handling correspondence. Maria was efficient, trustworthy, and most importantly, had no interest in his life insurance policies. The drive to the federal courthouse took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Rob used the time to review the victim impact statement he'd prepared, a detailed account of Lindsay's betrayal and its effects on his life, his business, and his recovery. Inside the courthouse, Rob took his seat in the gallery and watched Lindsay being led into the courtroom in shackles. She'd lost significant weight during her year in custody. Her face was pale and drawn, and her hair had been cut short in the institutional style of federal prison. When their eyes met across the courtroom, Rob saw no trace of the woman who'd celebrated his cancer diagnosis. What remained was a broken person who'd finally understood the true cost of betrayal. The sentencing hearing proceeded with mechanical precision. The federal prosecutor detailed Lindsay's crimes: money laundering, conspiracy, racketeering, and attempted murder. Derek Walsh's testimony, delivered via video link from his own federal prison, corroborated every charge. "Your Honor," Lindsay's attorney said during his final plea, "my client has shown genuine remorse for her actions. She's prepared to make full restitution and dedicate her life to making amends." Judge Patricia Hawkins looked unimpressed. "Ms. Morrison, you systematically betrayed your husband's trust for over 2 years. You celebrated his terminal diagnosis as a financial opportunity. You conspired to profit from his death while presenting yourself as a loving wife. The court finds your actions particularly heinous because they targeted someone in an extremely vulnerable state." Lindsay stood to receive her sentence, her hands shaking. "Lindsay Morrison, I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. You will serve this sentence consecutively with any state charges that may be filed." 18 years. Rob felt a cold satisfaction as Lindsay collapsed into her chair, finally understanding that her life as she'd known it was over. But Rob wasn't finished. When the judge asked if he wanted to read his victim impact statement, Rob stood and approached the podium. The courtroom was packed with reporters, Lindsay's family, and curious observers drawn by the sensational nature of the case. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the court," Rob began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "A year ago, I was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I was told I had 6 to 8 months to live. I returned home that day expecting comfort from my wife of 8 years. Rob paused, allowing the dramatic weight of his words to settle. "Instead, I found Lindsay Morrison celebrating my death sentence with her lover, toasting with champagne to her coming inheritance. I heard my wife call herself a rich widow and discuss how quickly I would die." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Several reporters were frantically taking notes. "What I discovered that night was that Lindsay had been systematically planning my death for over 2 years, transferring money to her lover, researching countries with no extradition treaties, and counting the days until my life insurance would make her rich." Rob turned to look directly at Lindsay, who was crying silently at the defendant's table. But Lindsay Morrison made one critical error in her planning. She underestimated the man she betrayed. "I spent the next year carefully documenting every aspect of her conspiracy while undergoing experimental treatment for my cancer. I recovered, completely and permanently recovered, while watching Lindsay and her accomplice destroy themselves through their own greed and desperation." The courtroom was completely silent now. Today, Lindsay Morrison will begin serving 18 years in federal prison. Her lover, Derek Walsh, is serving 15 years. They have lost everything: their freedom, their assets, their future together, and their reputations. Rob smiled, and several people in the courtroom later said it was the most chilling expression they'd ever seen. "I want everyone to understand this clearly. Robert Morrison forgives no one who betrays him. I do not forget. I do not show mercy to those who show me none. And I never, ever allow anyone to profit from stabbing me in the back." Rob paused for effect, then delivered his final blow. "As for my miraculous recovery from terminal cancer, sometimes the best medicine is watching your enemies get exactly what they deserve." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and shocked whispers. Rob returned to his seat as Lindsay's sobs echoed through the room. After the hearing, Rob was approached by Detective Ray Martinez, who'd worked on the initial investigation. "Mr. Morrison, can I ask you something off the record?" "Go ahead. How sick were you really?" "That last comment about your recovery." Rob smiled. Detective, I think you already know the answer to that question. So you were never actually dying? I was never going to let Lindsay Morrison win, Rob said simply. Everything else was just details. That evening, Rob hosted a dinner party at his house for his closest business associates and friends. The guest list included Bruce Hoffman, Tony Castellano, Dr. Palmer, and several other men who'd helped him execute his revenge. Gentlemen, Rob said, raising his glass of 20-year-old scotch, today we witnessed the completion of a very important project. Justice for those who thought Robert Morrison was an easy target. To justice, Tony Castellano said, raising his glass. To never forgetting a betrayal, Bruce Hoffman added. To the most comprehensive revenge I've ever witnessed, Dr. Palmer said with professional admiration. As his guests enjoyed dinner, Rob stepped out onto his deck and looked up at the stars. Somewhere in federal prison, Lindsay Morrison was beginning the first night of an 18-year sentence. Derek Walsh was serving his own time in a different facility, probably wondering how his life had gone so completely wrong. Neither of them would ever know the full extent of Rob's planning, the careful coordination required to destroy them so completely. They would spend the next decade and a half believing they'd simply been unlucky, that they'd been caught by an investigation they couldn't have anticipated. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. They had betrayed Robert Morrison, and Robert Morrison always collected what was owed to him. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos. Channel 7 News wants to interview you about the Morrison Foundation announcement. Should I schedule it? Rob typed back, yes. Make sure they understand I want to discuss the importance of loyalty and the consequences of betrayal. Tomorrow, he would officially launch his charitable foundation, funded entirely by money Lindsay had expected to inherit. The foundation would help other cancer patients and their families, people facing genuine crises rather than manufactured ones. But tonight, Rob Morrison stood alone on his deck, master of his empire, survivor of betrayal, and living proof that some people should never be underestimated. In the distance, he could see the lights of New York City, a reminder of all the opportunities that lay ahead. He was 43 years old, healthy, wealthy, and completely free from anyone who might betray him again. Robert Morrison had won the war in the most complete way possible, his enemies destroyed, his reputation enhanced, and his future unlimited. And he had done it all by simply being exactly who he'd always been, a man who never forgave, never forgot, and never lost. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.